Yesterday, on National Women and Girls in Sports Day, the president signed an executive order which is titled Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports and has a stated goal of protecting athletic opportunities for women and girls in the United States. So keep in mind, an executive order is a directive for officials, departments, and/or agencies within the federal government. Executive orders are not laws. So with any executive order, you'll have a purpose, and then you'll have a directive or multiple directives to carry out that purpose. In this case, the purpose is to oppose male competitive participation in women's sports by rescinding all funds from educational programs that deprive women and girls of fair athletic opportunities. The directives are for the Education Secretary, the DOJ, the Assistant to the President for Domestic Policy, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of Homeland Security. Specifically, these officials are to take certain actions to ensure that biological men are not playing in women's sports, whether that's the Education Secretary prioritizing Title IX enforcement actions against schools, whether that's the Assistant to the President for Domestic Policy convening representatives of major athletic organizations to promote policies consistent with this order, or whether that's the Secretary of State withdrawing from international support of programs that base female sports categories on gender identity rather than biological sex. All of those are directives laid out in the order that are meant to carry out the order's purpose. So let's talk through the rationale behind the order, because each executive order typically lays out the reasons, the authority, and the position of the federal government. In this order, the president cites to Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. Originally, what Title IX of the Education Amendments said is that schools that receive federal funds cannot discriminate on the basis of sex. And while this was enacted really to protect women specifically from discrimination, the effect of it and the way it's worded, right, provides equal opportunity for both male and female students to participate in educational programs, which includes sports. And that's just because Title IX doesn't specifically use the word women, it just says sex, no discrimination on the basis of sex. However, like I said, the purpose, despite not singling out women, was to give female athletes the same number of resources and opportunities in educational programs as men, something they have not always had. And it worked. By 2016, 1 in every 5 girls in the United States played sports, whereas pre-Title IX, that number was 1 in 27. But over time, Title IX evolved. So in the 80s and 90s, the Supreme Court issued a decision that clarified that sexual harassment and assault are forms of discrimination for purposes of Title IX. Later in 2011, President Obama issued guidance saying that Title IX protected LGBTQ students. And then building upon that guidance, most recently, President Biden issued a final rule which has more enforcement effect than, just simply guidance. And that rule added discrimination on the basis of sex stereotypes, sex characteristics, pregnancy or related conditions, sexual orientation, and gender identity to the list of Title IX prohibitions. And when that happened, Trump said that if he were elected, he would do away with that. So that is what he did via the executive order signed yesterday. Trump wrote in that order, quote, "Under Title IX of the Education Amendments Act of 1972, educational institutions receiving federal funds cannot deny women an equal opportunity to participate in sports. As some federal courts have recognized, ignoring fundamental biological truths between the two sexes deprives women and girls of meaningful access to educational facilities. Therefore, it is the policy of the United States to rescind all funds from educational programs that deprive women and girls of fair athletic opportunities, which results in the endangerment, humiliation, and silencing of women and girls and deprives them of privacy." End quote. And just as a quick related note, those cases that Trump cited to out of the federal courts regarding biological truths are actually both 2024 cases that overturned Biden's Title IX expansion to gender identity and sexual orientation. In the sports world, the NCAA has said since the signing of the order that the order provides a clear national standard and that it will be taking steps to align their policy to the directive. One interesting part of the order, and a section worth mentioning, is this section that applies to immigration, because the order is, of course, titled Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports. But then there's this provision that directs the Secretary of Homeland Security to review and adjust, if needed, policies permitting admission to the United States of males seeking to participate in women's sports and issue guidance preventing such entry to the extent permitted by law. The order cites to a specific provision of the Immigration and Nationality Act, which prevents individuals who have intentionally lied or hidden important information to gain entry into the United States from achieving immigration. In other words, Trump is saying that the act of identifying with a gender contrary to that person's biological sex would be grounds for DHS to deny that individual's visa application if that person was seeking a visa to participate in sports here in the United States. Now, with all of this said, and as with almost all changes to Title IX in the past, this order will almost certainly face legal challenges. So we will have to wait and see how this plays out in the courts, perhaps even the Supreme Court.